Chaz Lanier's recruitment is about to finally be over, and the decision between Kentucky, BYU, and Tennessee is coming down to the wire.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Daw, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be giving you the latest surrounding Chaz Lanier, the North Florida transfer. What's the latest update on him now that he has taken a visit to Kentucky, BYU, and Tennessee? Also on today's episode, going to get familiar with a name that we've not talked about yet on the show, a player that could maybe reclassify to the 2024 class and may be a Kentucky player at the end of the day. Will Riley, a five-star small forward, what do we know about him? Maybe the most fascinating prospect we've ever talked about on the show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. The latest on Chaz Lanier and his relationship with Kentucky basketball. There's been a lot of different rumors flying around online over the past 24 hours, and I'm not going to sit here and talk with you today about anything that has not been officially confirmed by somebody in the media that actually knows what they're talking about. So we're going to discuss what Joe Tipton of On3 has to say about Lanier's recruitment as of right now. And I will be reading from an article that you can go and find right now on On3, again, written by Joe Tipton about 7 or 8 hours ago. Talked about how Chaz Lanier is essentially the best player left in the transfer portal. If you've not heard anything about this kid, you've not watched this show, you've not read anything about Chaz Lanier, statistically the most efficient shooter in college basketball a season ago, one of the best guards in the transfer portal, period. Right now, I think he's the best player available, 19.7 points while shooting 51% from the floor and 44% from three. Really, really, really good numbers on the offensive end. Playing in the ASUN conference, we'll get to something that I want to talk about with the ASUN and its overall strength here in just a little bit. What we're talking here about his recruitment, which has essentially come down to three different schools: BYU, Tennessee, and the Kentucky Wildcats. And he has now taken visits to all three of those schools. First, the Cougars, second, the Wildcats, and third, the Volunteers here earlier this week. This is what Joe Tipton has to say in his article. I am told each of his finalists are still in the race, and he has not told any of the schools no yet. Multiple sources have said that Lanier has not showed any favoritism at this point, causing each of the schools to believe they have a decent shot here. Each of his three schools have a significant role and opportunity for him. Kentucky and Tennessee are the two closest in proximity to his hometown of Nashville. Tennessee's campus being about 2.5 hours away, Kentucky's being about 3.5 hours away. Tipton notes both of these options allow for his friends and family to come see him play frequently. Keep in mind, Lanier has been away at North Florida for the past 4 years. Both UT and UK give him options to be much closer to home. It right now looks like Kentucky and Tennessee have the advantage over BYU. This is me speaking. And that's kind of been the thing that's been rumored online over the past 48-ish hours, is that Kentucky and Tennessee are the ones in the battle, competing for Lanier's services, and that's essentially what Tipton has to say. Lanier choosing either Kentucky or Tennessee would not surprise me. Tennessee is the state in which he grew up in, and it was speculated they were the early favorite. The Vols also need a replacement for their star from this past season, Dalton Knecht. New Kentucky head coach Mark Pope coaches a very similar style of basketball Lanier played at North Florida, which is what I'm told is intriguing to him. The Wildcats also need a go-to scorer. The surprising school to many is BYU as their new head coach, Kevin Young, the former associate head coach of the Phoenix Suns. Young has previously worked with Devin Booker and others, which I'm told is attractive to Lanier. However, the Cougars are by far the furthest school from home. With all that being said, this one is a very close battle, and it's difficult to pinpoint a favorite. Lanier also declared for the NBA draft, but the current expectation is for him to return to college for his final year of eligibility. If I'm not mistaken, KSR, who is also with On3, Jack Pilgrim put out a similar thing earlier today saying that there have been no specifics given on Chaz Lanier, who's leading the race, who's going to end up getting his commitment. Right now, it's all up in the air. There have been a number of different rumors that have flown around the rumor mill over the past couple of days talking about whether or not, he's going to end up committing to Kentucky and that's just where we lie, or the coaching staff has said it's not a mutual fit, or X, Y, and Z. We're not getting into that because I truly don't know if any of that is even remotely close to legitimate, and I'm going to stick with what we're hearing here from On3, from both Tipton and from Pilgrim over at KSR. I currently have no insider information on this subject, on this transfer portal player. If I did, I would probably be able to give you a little bit more clarity, but frankly, I don't think anybody does. That's kind of where I wanted to lead the show here today. Don't believe everything you see or read online. Not everybody is an insider. A lot of people want to be. A lot of people are not. And it really does lead to a lot of, I think, negative conversations that happen on social media that, frankly, don't need to happen. Right now, Chaz Lanier is a phenomenal player, and I think that regardless of whether he ends up at Kentucky or Tennessee or wherever he may go, I think he's going to be a fun player to watch. Tennessee, Kentucky seem like the favorites, according to what people who are in the know would know about the situation. But as of today, May 22nd, 2024, there's not a clear lean. Is it Kentucky? Is it UT? We're just going to have to wait and see. Did not mean that to rhyme. The final thing here I want to talk about with Chaz Lanier is the fact that there are so many different people on both Kentucky and Tennessee's sides here, fans of the Vols and the Wildcats, preemptively saying, well, if we don't get him, then we didn't really want him because he can't play defense. He's not as good as Dalton Knecht was. The big stickler here is the fact that he played in the Atlantic Sun Conference, which was terrible last year. How much of his game is actually going to be able to translate? There was an article put out from, I believe, just an anonymous scout, essentially telling, I believe it was On3, that he was further behind than Chaz Lanier was further behind than the scout expected. Even though physically he didn't look like a mid-major player, it's just as far as his game goes, he didn't really light anything up offensively. That's because he didn't really play a ton in 2 games. 2 games does not make a player. 2 combine games do not make a player. I mean, they may make a player for actually getting drafted, but in terms of what he could do in college, I don't think it matters a lick. And to come out and say, from either side, from Kentucky or Tennessee's fan base, to come out and say, this guy is not going to work out. Like, definitively say this guy's not going to work out because he's not good defensively and he played in an extremely weak conference. I think that's short-sighted. I think that there is a very real chance that Lanier statistically does not play like he did at North Florida if he comes to an SEC school, or even if he goes to BYU in the Big 12, it'd be rugged out there. That's a very real possibility. But to completely write it off as a definitive that he's not going to be able to perform, again, I think is short-sighted because we have seen numerous examples of players coming from the mid-ranger ranks, whether that be from an conference or a very bad conference, and coming and showing out and performing. These Power 5 schools, with their resources and their ability to develop these talents and their ability to surround these good players with better players than they were playing with in the mid-major schools, it elevates their game and it makes them look better. We talked about this on yesterday's show when it comes to freshmen, when it comes to 4- and 5-star freshmen. If you surround them with good talent to start off, they're going to look a lot more competent because they have better teammates. Basketball is a team sport. It's not about the individual. Chaz Lanier played in the A-Sun. The A-Sun is objectively not that great of a conference. It's not a good conference. Antonio Reeves played at Illinois State. Illinois State doesn't play in a good conference. Dalton Knecht, last year, 2 years ago, played in the Big Sky at Northern Colorado. According to KenPom, that was the number 17 conference in the country. The ASUN was right behind it at number 18. I put this tweet out about an hour ago, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. For everyone saying that Chaz Lanier may not be able to translate his game to the SEC because he played in the ASUN, it could be the case. However, Ainsley Almanor, recent Kentucky commit, came from FDU, Fairleigh Dickinson, which is in the NEC. According to KenPom, that is the worst conference in the nation. So is Ainsley going to play poorly too? I just don't believe that's the case. There's talent in these mid-major conferences. The entire product of a mid-major school, mid-major program, I don't think is a true reflection of some of these players that are making their way up to these higher ranks. You're pulling the good out of an overall average or poor product, and you're adding it to, at the bare minimum, an average product, and by mid-major standards, a good product, and by our standards, a very good product in a Tennessee, in a Kentucky, in an Alabama, in an SEC school. You're going to see players make mistakes. You're going to see players statistically take a drop-offs. You're going to see players not work out and develop. It happens. But at places like UConn, places like Kentucky, places like Arkansas with Musselman, you saw time and time and time again, transfers come in, transfers exceed expectations from mid-major schools, and transfers contribute to a very good team. UConn has made a living grabbing high school players and transfer portal pieces and combining them together and keeping them on rosters for multiple years and finding success, and they've now won back-to-back national championships. Players like Chaz Lanier will come in and I think do their job at Tennessee, at Kentucky, at wherever. Just because he played in the ASUN doesn't mean he's an ASUN product by the end of March of 2025. I just don't think that's the case. Let me know what you think about Chaz Lanier, Kentucky basketball, whether or not he actually can perform. I feel like it's weird having to defend somebody that's not already committed. I feel more inclined to defend mid-major schools because it's what's feeding the big boys in college basketball right now. I think a lot of people are not slow to accept. They're not quick to accept the way college basketball has changed and is currently changing. The transfer portal, the ability to pay players for their play. It's changing the way that the roster, the average college basketball roster is constructed. And if you're looking at the highest level, which Kentucky is playing at, you're going to need to see some changes. You're going to need to see Kentucky do some things differently than they've done in the past. Players like Chaz Lanier could not work out, but I'd be willing to bet, and I'm not a gambling man, but if I was betting, I'd say that he goes and he plays well to maybe even great at a school like Kentucky or Tennessee or wherever. Let me know in the comments below what you think at LockedOnUK on Twitter. There's a player that Kyle Tucker of The Athletic recently threw out in a tweet as a potential reclassification to come play for Kentucky basketball. 5-star Will Riley. What do we know about Will Riley? What have we seen? Go ahead and tell you. Watching this kid, it may be the most interesting player, and I know I use the words fascinating and interesting in those types of words. I use them way too often. This may be the most unconventional scorer that I've ever talked about on the channel. Who is Will Riley? Let's talk about that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. You can keep your ride or die alive over at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, continuing along here on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, I really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel already, I would greatly appreciate it if you went and did so. If you are listening on podcast, leave me a review. Let me know what you think about the show. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you are tuned in. All right, so we've talked here about Chaz Lanier. I've given my 2 cents on whether or not he could pan out at the next level, mid-major to college. And I want to talk about a player that I think can pan out at the next level from high school to college. It's just going to be a very interesting development story, I think. So Kyle Tucker, like I mentioned earlier, tweeted out about Chaz Lanier, what Kentucky's going to do with Jackson Robinson, which things are trending positively there. We're going to talk about that on tomorrow's show. What Kentucky does with recruiting. And he threw this out earlier today. He said if UT, Tennessee, wins the Chaz Lanier sweepstakes and UK then gets Jackson Robinson, all is well for Mark Pope. But a miss on both, or Robinson simply staying in the draft, and it gets a bit dicey. Pope needs a wing score. Would think a push to land and reclass 5-star Will Riley then heats up. He goes on to quote tweet and say, feels to me like Lanier may have the higher ceiling and Robinson the higher floor. I'm super intrigued by Lanier, but it's a huge jump in competition. Robinson has played in the SEC and Big 12 and performed. Robinson is also 6'7" versus Lanier 6'4". But I want to focus here on that final sentence of that first tweet. Would think to push to land and reclass 5-star Will Riley then heats up. Will Riley was a kid that performed at the most recent EYBL circuit that Pope and his staff were at in Indianapolis. 5-star player. And he released, I want to say 3 days ago, his top 5. Riley did. Which includes Alabama, Arizona, Kentucky, a potential move to the NBL. And the Wildcats, I didn't know this until just today, apparently are making the push to try and get him to reclassify. Riley, I'll talk about where he is on 24/7 first. 24/7 has him as a 4-star. Just their raw player rating. 6'8", 180 pounds, played at the Phelps School in Pennsylvania. Number 3 small forward in the class, number 22 overall player. The composite rating for this kid is a 5-star, a near perfect 5-star. Well, not near perfect, but a highly rated 5-star, which means a lot. Number 16 overall nationally, number 3 small forward in the country, number 2 in the state of Pennsylvania. 24/7 Sports gives no scouting report on this kid. So naturally, I had to go and watch the kid and look up some of the statistics and kind of get my own opinion before looking at what somebody like Cooper Pategna or somebody like Adam Finkelstein had to say. I didn't even look at what Jamie Shaw had to say of On3 first. I went and watched this kid. I watched a few videos. At 6'8", it is the most, these are the 3 words I have written down for you here today. Will Riley is a scorer, right? He scores the basketball. These are the 3 words I use to describe it. unconventional, quirky, and diverse. Will Riley plays the game at a high level differently than I've seen any other high school prospect do it. And obviously, I'm not new to watching high school players and kind of breaking down kind of what they are about. But this is a first for me. The way that he likes to operate with the ball in his hands at 6'8". I watched all these things, and then I decided to go see what On3 had to say about Will Riley. So I mentioned 24/7 Sports has him as a 4-star. ESPN has him as a 4-star. Rivals has him as a 4-star. So why is he a composite 5-star on 24/7 Sports? Well, it's because On3 has him rated as a top 10 prospect and a 5-star in the 2025 class. They are extremely high on this kid, and they wrote an article about it. Jamie Shaw did earlier in January. And I'm just going to read a direct quote from Shaw. To say that Riley has a quirky way of scoring would be an understatement. Riley's feel in the mid-range is unlike many of his high school peers. He attacks the defense, gets 2 feet in the paint, and then has an array of step-throughs, up and unders, reverse pivots, and fadeaways to create an angle to get an open shot. I could not agree more with what Shaw had to say here. I didn't want to put down a bunch of words breaking down his game on my notes because that is exactly how I feel about it. It is not typical for a 6'8" forward/guard to score the way that Riley does. And it goes against a lot of the things that I preach here on the show as far as efficiency, as far as shot selection, as far as statistics go. I'm not a massive fan of mid-range shots. I continue to say I don't believe in the extinction of the mid-range jump shot. I believe that you're statistically playing more efficient basketball if you do so, but I don't believe that's something that you completely take out of the game. I feel like if you have players that are good at knocking it down at a higher than average rate, it needs to be a part of your offense. But I don't think it should be a focal point. And I think that Kentucky has had personnel over the past few seasons that they've tried to force to do that have not been really great at it. This kid is great at it. Like Shaw said, it's the movement, it's gliding past a defender or through a defender to get to a spot in the mid-range and kind of contorting his body in a herky-jerky way to get an angle or an opening, whether that be fading away, going through a player, up and under a player. It's really fascinating to watch him kind of work with his length. He's not length, and he's not a particularly lengthy player. He doesn't have an insanely long wingspan. He's just at 6'8". He's able to create some different things with guard handling skills that maybe most people are not. He doesn't take a ton of threes, and he's not really operating a ton directly at the rim whenever he goes to work. He's not working on post-ups at 6'8". It's almost exclusively in these highlight reels mid-range. It's, like Shaw described, just creating open shots in a weird and different way. And the statistics that come with this shot selection are actually very impressive. Of Riley's 371 shot attempts through about halfway through his high school season earlier this year, in 18 games, 77% of them have been from two-point range. Synergy says that 58.5% of Riley's shots come off jump shots or runners. Almost 80% of those shots are off the bounce. So the majority of his shots have been from inside the arc. Over half of those shots have been jump shots or runners inside the arc. And almost all of those shots are coming off of the bounce. Riley gets a lot of his offensive work done in the mid-range, which is somewhat of a throwback to the concepts that are being taught in basketball today, according to Jamie Shaw. Shaw continues, however, in staying with the modern analytics aspects, Riley is shooting 46.4% from three on 4.7 attempts per game. he's shooting 41.7% in catch and shoot threes and 48.9% in off the dribble threes this season. Timeout. Let's unpack all of that. This kid at 6'8" is able to glide to different spots in the mid-range comfortably. Just like he's not pressured, he's not forced. It's just calmly getting to his spots and just in weird ways moving and like contouring his body to get open against defenders. Again, and whenever he does actually get to his spots, it's kind of like, I know that fluidity and herky-jerky kind of clash, but it's impressive how well he just like kind of gets to different spots. And it's like kind of weird, like whenever he finally decides how he wants to take a shot. It's like it's fascinating, kind of like almost second guessing himself in a way, the way that he moves his upper body. But he hits the shot. He is able to knock it down. He's able to push back or go under or just go rise straight up and it just kind of through or past people. It's so fascinating. But those percentages there, 46.4% from downtown, almost 5 3-point attempts per game. So the kid's taking a lot of shots. He is a pure scorer. That's what this kid is coming out here to do. Put up some shots. And he's insanely efficient on threes, period. But did you catch that at the very end? Catch and shoot versus off of the dribble. 41.7% in catch and shoot threes. Statistically, that's not bad. 41.7% in catch and shoot situations. We'll take that. That's good. The fact that his off the dribble shooting percentage is essentially 7% higher, meaning whenever he is off balance, whenever he is creating instead of being on the receiving end of a pass to catch and shoot the ball, he is 7% more effective in those type of shots where he is off balance, where he is not supposed to be hitting at a higher rate. You've heard me, if you've been watching this show, if you've been watching this show for a couple of years, if you've been watching it for the past few months, listening to me talk about transfer portal players, we've noticed most players tend to have a side of the three-point line that they favor, and it's usually their dominant hand. Typically, it's not like majority dominant hand. So like if you have a right-handed shooter, they're going to be statistically more efficient at shooting right wing threes. It's not always the case, but I would say most of the time it's the case. And you'll also see players, most of the ones that we've talked about that Kentucky has recruited, almost all of them, are either good or really, really good in catch and shoot situations as opposed to creating off the dribble. It's actually something we've talked about with different players, a couple of which have already committed to the team, where creating off the dribble, their effective field goal percentage is like one of the worst among Power 5 teams. But their catch and shoot is among some of the best in the country. And when you look at Kobe Brea, he is quite literally the best catch and shoot player. He's also pretty good at creating off the dribble, but I digress. The fact that Riley is the opposite, he prefers the mid-range. But when he does take threes, and he takes about 5 a game, which means he's chucking up a lot of shots inside the arc. But when he does take threes, he is a more efficient player when you give him the ball. Whenever it's not, okay, we're going to run a play to get you open and you're going to be running off ball. No, you're going to be the one handling the ball and you're going to be the one going out to score off of screens, in spot-up situations. That is fascinating. I know I use interesting and fascinating. I overuse those words. This is the most fascinating player that I have had the pleasure of watching as a potential Kentucky prospect so far. Shaw continues breaking down this kid. Not only is he methodical and precise with how he goes about it, but he goes out and consistently puts up numbers. The counting statistics support the eye test, and that Will Riley can get buckets. However, the advanced analytics enhance the counting stats to show that Riley's bag is deep. And that brings me back to my final word that I had earlier about diverse. He can do so many different things to free himself up to get a bucket inside of the arc. It's fun to watch. It's a little weird, but it's fun. Outside of the arc, it's the same. The fact that you have a true 3-level score that I think has a lot of upside physically, adding weight, developing, et cetera, things that are just going to come naturally. That makes him a really, really cool prospect, I think. This may be the coolest prospect I've talked about. If he does reclassify, I'd love to see him. That's kind of where I want to end the show today. I'd love to see him on next year's Kentucky team. If Kentucky doesn't get Jackson Robinson, if they don't get Chaz Lanier, if they get just one of them, I'd still like to see that final scholarship be used on this kid. I think he'd be super fun to watch in coming years. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Could Will Riley reclassify and commit? What do you think about what I've talked about today? Go watch some of his highlight reels. Can't show them on the channel, but you can definitely find them on YouTube. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDaw_. And you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.